Welcome to the Tune Project podcast, a show that features instrumental voices within the global folk music community. I'm your host, Lauren Abels, and today I am joined by Andy Leftwich, an award-winning fiddler and mandolin player and one of the most respected voices in contemporary acoustic instrumental music. Andy's latest album, Aced, brings together a powerhouse group of musicians he calls the Aces, blending bluegrass, Celtic, and modern influences into a collection of original tunes and thoughtfully chosen covers. Andy's playing is both virtuosic and deeply musical, and his work reflects a lifelong dedication to composing, arranging, and continually growing as an artist. Aced is a beautiful example of that evolution, and I'm so excited to have him here today. All of the music featured in today's episode comes from Andy's album, Aced. You'll hear talk about suffering, a powerful piece that offered comfort to those affected by Hurricane Helene's flooding in East Tennessee and North Carolina, Crossful, a bluegrass tune with Celtic influence written by Ricky Skaggs and first recorded over 20 years ago by a band that included Andy and former Ricky Skaggs and Kentucky Thunder colleague and two-time IBMA Guitar Player of the Year, Cody Kilby. And to kick things off, Road to Antioch, an original that beautifully showcases Andy's deep connection to the sounds and traditions of contemporary bluegrass. Enjoy. All right. Well, hi, Andy. Welcome to the show.
Well, hello. Thank you for having me.
I'd love to start by having you tell our listeners a little bit about how you were introduced to the fiddle. You grew up in Tennessee. You started when you were 6 and entered your first fiddle contest when you were 7. What do you remember from that time?
I was just blown away by, other kids my own age and a little older that were so much more far advanced and better than what I had been at that time, and just was, eager to learn what they knew and how they learned it, and it pushed me to want to be better. Just being around other musicians that were a little bit more advanced than I was, and so meeting some making great friends and relationships in those years. It's where I met Cody Kilby, the guitar player, and just have a lot of great memories being involved in jams when the contest wasn't going on, and so just making memories and meeting great folks along the way. So
You mentioned the word compare is coming to mind, and that's not the best word choice, but sort of being aware of other people's levels, right? Other musicians' skill levels and other fiddle players. And that's something that I've noticed, well, for myself when I was first learning as well, but with other fiddle players that I've spoken with and just musicians in general, how having other musicians around, whether you're jamming with them or just listening to them, whether it's recitals or whatever the environment may be, it's so powerful as a motivator to want to learn and progress yourself. Whereas if you're just, practicing on your own at home all the time and not really being exposed to other musicians,
yeah,
there's a little bit of a difference there. And
absolutely.
so that's an experience I can definitely relate to. And like you said, I think it really does help to kind of push us forward as musicians.
Absolutely. And the great thing for me at that age, having a contest to look forward to every weekend gave me a goal in my practice times. It gave me a goal to shoot for, to learn a new song or learn a new arrangement, come up with a different arrangement. and then have a chance to perform it in front of people on a stage somewhere is a, I mean, it kept me motivated. However, I think music is definitely not a contest. So at some point, you need to get away from that mindset. I think as kids, it's and even as adults, it's a great tool to motivate you to practice and try to get better at your craft. And and occasionally you walk away with a win, and it just builds your confidence.
Definitely, definitely. I
Yeah.
like how you worded that. There's kind of a balance, right? Where you don't want to
Mhm.
view everything as a contest, but at the
Right.
same time, take the positives from those experiences.
Yes, ma'am.
Who were some of your influences when you were coming up? Who were you listening to?
Well, my first biggest influence was Mark O'Connor. My dad bought Mark's record, The New Nashville Cats, I think it was '92 when it was released, and I'll never forget being on the baseball field. My team was at bat, and so I was in the dugout, and my dad came and got me out of the dugout and said, "Come here, son, you have to listen to this just for a few minutes." And that was the first time I'd ever heard of Mark O'Connor, and just immediately loved his style and the songs that he had on that project. And so that particular CD was my number one influence at that age. I believe I was 9 years old when I was introduced to Mark. And learning about his background in competitions, I immediately had that in common with Mark. And so I credit my biggest influence to him when I was really young. When I was a teenager, I met Stuart Duncan, and my whole thinking changed and how I approached the fiddle after I was introduced to Stuart, and how he played in a band, and the beauty of how he plays in a band and behind a vocalist. It was just something I always wanted to be like, and so I always approach music thinking of how he might approach it. And then later on, I met Ricky Skaggs, and so started touring with Ricky for about 15 years, and obviously always loved Ricky's playing. And you know but I guess when I joined his band and got to know Ricky, and and play music with him on a consistent basis, he to this day is just the most amazing musician I've ever met in my life. And what's great about Ricky is that he still plays like he's 20 years old, and I love that. He's just full of heart when he plays. And those were probably the big three in my life, up to my 20s, and then they still are. But obviously you meet different players and different genres of music, and you get inspired by bunches of folks. So, but definitely Mark and Stuart and Ricky were my three big influences growing up.
Andy,
Hmm.
you've been recognized as an exceptional fiddle and mandolin player since your teens. And I want to know, how has your relationship with these instruments and with music itself changed over the years?
Oh goodness, well, that's a great question. Well, obviously, music is always evolving, and we're always trying to push the boundaries and create new and exciting ideas. And so, you know, when you go back and you listen to bluegrass from the 46 and 47 time period, I mean, those guys were writing the vocabulary of bluegrass licks and phrases and solos that no one had done before them. And so they were experimenting themselves at the moment, and they were trying their best to make it all work. And obviously, with the technology of recording and the more um, precision that people play with these days, I think has been the biggest evolution in music and bluegrass pickers, is just how uh, amazing the execution is in what they play. And I've always been big on execution. I think that comes from my contest years, being judged on how well you play the song. The older I get, the more I start to appreciate guys who might not be as clean of a player, but they have some incredible ideas when they play, and you can feel their heart when they play. And that's what inspires me more than anything today. But definitely, the mandolin and fiddle for me, I mean, I've always been a mandolin player second. Fiddle has always been my first instrument. So I always approach the mandolin like I do a fiddle player. Um, but you've got guys that the fiddle might be a second instrument and their mandolin might be their first instrument. So they might approach the violin or the fiddle as they would be a mandolin player. And there is a difference, there's difference in your fingerings and your phrases. And so I've always just tried to implement what I knew on the fiddle and apply it to the mandolin. And like I said, I mean, I love to experiment and try to come up with arrangements and tunes that are exciting for the listener just as much as they are the player. Because a lot of times in bluegrass music, you've got an audience that really appreciate instrumental music, but they are players themselves. And so my goal has always been to create and write songs that would relate to somebody that don't necessarily play, and that are fun to listen to, and that's always a challenge, but it's a fun challenge.
That's such an interesting thing that you mentioned. The mindset shift, I think, is so apparent because that's so true. Listening to bluegrass music, a lot of it is really geared toward other musicians, even other
Hmm.
bluegrass musicians. And so it can be a little niche in that sense, but as you said, there's such a broad audience that could be exposed to these styles and that could really
Yeah.
appreciate them or maybe want
Mhm.
to, but maybe they feel like it's just out of reach because they're not players themselves. So I wonder what is your approach in kind of keeping those audience members in mind, maybe the
Yeah.
non-musicians? How does your approach change when keeping those people in mind versus musicians?
Yeah, well, melody is everything. I think if you can sing a melody, no matter if it's a lyric song or an instrumental song, if you can sing the melody, I think, you're writing a good melody. So I always try to start with a melody that somebody could, hum or sing, and try to, you get a song in your mind, that kind of thing. But um, there's a time and place to really think of intricate melodies and show off that ability. But I love to come in my studio and pick up my instrument early in the morning and just kind of see what flows out. And a lot of times there's some sweet melodies that come out, or some ideas for things that you need to sit and practice and develop. But for me, the melody is everything.
That's so true. So, so true. And, it's like I say, at the end of the day, music is fun. It's
Hmm.
meant to, build community, and people a lot of times just want to sing or clap along when they're experiencing it. So I
Yeah.
really like that concept of keeping the melody in mind. And especially, and as fiddle
Yeah.
players, we're so melody driven a lot of the time that that's
Right.
probably, I would imagine, a pretty easy mindset to have.
Yeah, and something else I learned from my friend Dave Pomeroy in the group. I was with Three Ring Circle with Rob Ikes and Dave. Dave was he came from like a almost an R&B background, and so he had a lot of groove in his playing. And what I learned is that not everybody can relate to intricate melodies and fast licks, but everybody can relate to groove. Everybody can nod along or tap their foot to a groove. And so I always try to write songs that create a good groove. And bluegrass music, I mean, it's easy because you've got the feel of the mandolin chop and obviously the bass. So I always try to find something that has a good groove that people can relate to there as well.
And that groove certainly comes through on Aced, which I would love to talk about next.
Yeah.
What I love about this project is that it really feels both collaborative but deeply personal. It's also just so fun and alive, and we'll get to the star players that helped you bring the album to life. But first, I want to know what inspired you to create Aced, and what did you want it to express that your previous recordings didn't?
Wow. Well, thank you for asking that. It's a loaded question. I think, uh, a lot like American Fiddler, these are just songs that sort of just come out, when you pick up your instrument and you practice for a little bit and you just sort of start noodling and you play. And when I listen to a lot of music and I listen to a lot of different players. And when you put something in, it's got to come out. And so when you listen to a lot of music, every once in a while something comes out and it's really fun. And so I always keep my voice recorder handy on my iPhone, and I've probably got two or three hundred different voice memos from just different ideas and phrases that I felt like have come out while I've just been sitting alone, noodling or practicing. Um, and so that's what Aced is. It's just more of those songs that were just based on a quick idea, or a phrase that may have came out that I just developed over time. Some of the songs are new. Some of the songs are I've had for a long time, and wasn't quite sure what to do with them until you kind of get in the studio with the players, and then it sort of comes alive after that. But I had the bones of the songs, for a while, and so in that sense, it's a lot like the American Fiddler, where it's just songs that have been influenced by my favorite players and my favorite records. But as we went along making the record, you know, I, I didn't necessarily plan it like this, but the players on the record are the same players throughout the entire thing from top to bottom. And a lot of times with records, instrumental records these days, and you've got a guest player here on this one track, and then you've got a different band on another track, and it's rare that you get a CD that's cohesive from top to bottom with the same players. And so I was really excited to have these incredible aces play on this record, and we've had just a great experience, and I hope folks love the music.
Yes, they definitely do. Or they definitely will. I'm acting like it's already out because I'm so used to listening to it over the last week or so. But we definitely do have to talk about the Aces. You assembled a stellar group of players for this record. Cody Kilby of the Travelin' McCurries, Byron House from Nickel Creek, Sam Bush Band, Matt Menifee from Cadillac Sky and Mumford and Sons. Just some real world-class pickers in that group. How did your history with these guys shape the chemistry of the musical conversation that's so palpable on the album?
Well, we've known each other for a long time. I got to know Matt when he was in the group Cadillac Sky, and they moved up from Texas to join the label Skaggs Family Records, and they released a couple of CDs on Ricky's label, and that's where I met Matt. And nobody knew about Matt, and I was in the studio one day. I wasn't recording with him, but I was doing something else. But I was in the studio that day watching Matt play, and I'm just completely mesmerized by his ability and thinking, man, there's not many guys that play on that level on the banjo that I've ever seen. And so I just immediately always loved Matt and thought of Matt anytime I would think of of a project. And that was years ago. Cody, like I said earlier, Cody and I grew up in the contest circuit, and we would see each other every other weekend, or couple months out of the year. We would see each other at contests, and so we would always compete against each other. And I always like to tease Cody and tell him, that he always got the better of me in competitions, and I'm still not over it yet. So I always try to outplay him. But so Cody, I've known Cody the longest. We've been friends since we were probably really about 9 years old, I think, 8 or 9 years old. And so, when he joined Ricky's band, I had only been there for a few months and just spent 14 and a half, 15 years with Cody on the road with Ricky, and it just was always a joy to play music with him, and it still is. And there's few musicians that you're around that you feel like you can totally be yourself musically with, and Cody's definitely one of those guys for me. And he actually gives me a ton of confidence when I play music with him, and so whether he realizes that or not, he does, and I so appreciate that about Cody. Byron, I first met him when he was playing with Sam Bush. I saw him when he was with Nickel Creek at the Ryman Auditorium, and I just remember seeing the tone and the touch, the dynamics that he played with, the note choices. I just was totally blown away by his ability, and so I got to meet him a few months later, and by that time he was already with Sam Bush, and he was just even a nicer guy. And so he was very nice. He was very gracious enough to join me on this little gig I had years ago, and I called him up, and I was so surprised that he did it. And so I don't know, we just hit it off. We became good friends, and they are very kind to humor my songs and my ideas. And so when I called them about this project in particular, I'd sent them the ideas of the songs ahead of time, and they came totally prepared. They knew the songs, ready to record, and it just blew me away that they would do that. And so we had a great time getting to create.
That sounds like so much fun. And I mean, you've got a group of pros. I'm sure it's just a blast being able to just do your thing. And also for you specifically to see your ideas come to life and hear how
Yeah.
each player has their own personal stamp that they're adding to this
Mhm.
project. I'm sure that's really special.
Yes, it's the joy of what we do. Seeing your something you created come to life. It's incredible. It's the most joy I find in music.
Well, you've mentioned that you have a deep love for composing and arranging instrumental music. What is it that you love so much about these art forms, and how does your own voice as a musician play a role in that?
Well, the art of composing is like I said. I mean, the creative aspect of music is where I find the most joy, and um, I think anybody would tell you that in any field that they work with. My dad was a carpenter, and so um, I've I've toyed a little bit with carpentry, and so when you build something, it brings you joy, and so um, and music is the same way. You when you come up with a melody and then you show it to other musicians and it starts to come to life, it's a great thrill. Um, and also the challenge of it is important to me because I want to be able to challenge myself, but also have a song that's going to mean something to them. When I get called to play on somebody else's record, there's days that are more challenging than others, and there's days that are more fun than others. There's artists and songs that you enjoy playing on more so than others. And one thing that I always loved about Ricky in all the years got to play with him is that every single show was a challenge, and it was always fun. And every song he ever wrote, every instrumental he ever wrote was uh, a, a joy. It was a lot of fun to play those songs. And so any song that I might write, I'm always prayerful that I want those guys to feel the same way about my songs. And so it's for me, if I can accomplish both creativity and a challenge, that's I feel like I'm doing something. But then again, I never underestimate the power of a very simple melody that you can really express yourself on. And so that's something I'm actually working on for this next project that we're going to dive into. I'm going to try to get a little bit more melody driven songs as opposed to, you know, barn burners and bluegrass music, as they would call it. And so I'm looking forward to that. And just creating great music has always been my goal.
Now, when you write tunes, are you primarily writing melody for fiddle and then letting the other instrumentalists that come into the project add their own melody or solos or things like that? Or are you at any point actually writing out specific parts for multiple instruments?
No, so it does vary. I mean, sometimes I'll write a song with the fiddle in hand and a melody will come out. There's a song on this new project called Old Hickory that I actually wrote on the guitar. And as was writing the song, I was like, this was one of the songs that I thought, man, Cody would really sound. I mean, he could really play this well. I thought of Cody when I wrote this song, and so knowing that Cody would be playing guitar, I picked up the fiddle and changed a couple of phrasing. Because not everything, what lays good on the left hand on a fiddle might not lay good on the guitar, and so you sort of have to find a balance between all that. And so, but most of the songs I write are, if I write it on the fiddle, then there'll be a fiddle tune. If I write it on a guitar, it'll be a guitar tune. So, and then once I feel like I've got a good melody, a good structure, then I'll start to build it, and think about adding different layers and different parts. Um, and sometimes what makes or breaks a song is just simply a different section of a song, or maybe adding a double fiddle, a twin fiddle, or something. So there's a lot that goes into it, a lot of variables, but for the most part, just whatever comes out is what I try to capture.
One thing I noticed when listening to your music is your originals feel very rooted in tradition, yet unmistakably modern. And I'm curious, how do you balance honoring these musical traditions you're pulling from, whether it's bluegrass, Celtic, gospel, gypsy jazz, while continuing to push the music forward?
Oh man, I don't know. To be honest with you, it's uh, I love all of those styles of music, and so when I listen to a great Irish record, I'm probably gonna go home that evening and write something that's pretty Irish. And Irish music's a big influence on my playing, and I don't consider myself an Irish fiddler, but I definitely love that style of playing. And growing up playing those contest tunes, those fiddle tunes are, they're sort of the hillbilly version of Irish music, and so that's just something that always comes out in my writing and playing. I will say this though, when it comes to a typical fiddle tune, you basically have an A part and a B part. You've got two parts, and you just kind of play those parts over, and you improvise around it, and you build a an arrangement to those melodies. But something that I love about instrumental music is there's really no rules. You can sort of, you know, put something together and make it go in different directions and different scenes. Um, Easily. You don't have a lyric or something, a lyric content to where you have to base your music around. And so when I first started writing songs, I think my creativity got the best of me, and I'd go back and listen and be like, man, I'd have a 6 or 7 minute long song, and it's just hard to keep a listener's attention for that long. And so a big challenge for me in writing songs is trying to come up with different parts that would complement each other. So typically when I write a song, I usually think of a two-part fiddle tune with maybe a bridge or a C section, that you would use, and uh, along the way. So that's kind of my approach to writing instrumentals.
Okay, that's so interesting because it sounds like what you're doing is kind of a combination between songwriting and tune writing. You're talking about the A
Mhm.
and B part, you're talking about that traditional structure of a fiddle tune, but then you mentioned bridge or C
Mhm.
part. So it sounds like you're kind of combining these two formats, these two methods. But I mean, it works beautifully. Clearly, it
Mhm.
works really well. But is that sort of am I right about that? Is that sort of the way that you're thinking about these things when you're writing songs?
For the most part, it is, yeah. Because I get bored really easily. I mean, if I mean, I love fiddle tunes, and I love jam songs, but man, after when it comes to creating instrumental music, I like to explore a little bit more and try my best to come up with a part that complements the melody that's already been stated. I like scene changes in instrumental music. My favorite instrumental arranger ever is Bela Fleck. I think he is one of the greatest when it comes to creating a piece of music. It's not just a tune; it's a piece of music. It's a work of art, and so
Yes.
he's been a big influence on me with his writing. So I always try to think like that along those lines.
Hmm. We have a lot of adult beginners, fiddlers that listen to this show, and I'd love to have you speak to them for a moment. For beginner fiddle students who want to be able to improvise and create fiddle solos of their own, but are nervous to take that first step outside of their comfort zone, what advice would you give them?
So I would tell them to go for it, and be ready to mess up a lot of times, and don't be afraid to mess up, because improvising comes when you learn more tunes. And so what I always did is I took different phrases from a fiddle tune and would use it in another fiddle tune in the same key. So, for instance, if you're learning Angeline the Baker, well, you can probably use one of those phrases into the song Forked Deer or something, because it's in the same key, and you can, or vice versa, learn the song Forked Deer is a great fiddle tune that's got some really nice phrases that you can, especially the last phrase of that tune, you can use it for another song that's in the same key. So, sort of kind of cut and paste different licks from other fiddle tunes. And that's a great way to try to improvise. Um, when I started improvising, I would go for things, and I would 9 times out of 10, I wouldn't land it, and I would have to sort of recover my way out of it. And and honestly, by messing up is how I learned to improvise. Because in those contest days, the number one unwritten rule that every contest player would know is that no matter how bad you mess up, don't stop playing. Just keep playing. Do something. Keep playing. Play your way through the mistake and try your best to recover and get back on track. Um, and so I think with that rule, it helped me learn how to improvise and just listening to other players, listening to how they may phrase a certain lick, whether or not they use their ring finger to slide up to the high E note on the A string, or whether they use their pinky, different things like that. Different exploring different positions on the fingerboard. So the more knowledge you gain, the easier it is to going to learn how to improvise. And don't be afraid to mess up. And that's the biggest advice I can give anybody is because when you eventually do land something, it does nothing but build your confidence and makes you want to go for more.
That's so true and such great advice. I think a lot of adults, especially, are so afraid to mess up, so afraid to make mistakes that it actually prevents them from putting themselves in those situations where they're
Sure.
experimenting and having fun and giving themselves permission to improvise. So I think that's such an
Yeah.
important thing to keep in mind
Yeah.
is to not be afraid to mess up because, like you said, that's really how we learn as musicians. You
Yes.
play something, it doesn't sound quite right, or rhythmically it's not fitting in with what other people are doing, and then you adjust. But if
Yes.
you hadn't had that experience, and you wouldn't know to do that, and you wouldn't be able to, make those quick decisions on the fly.
That's exactly right. Music brings out every insecurity in us, and so you have to sort of own it and just know that this is you're vulnerable when you play music and when you play in front of people. It's a vulnerable thing. So don't be afraid to admit that. But that's how you get good is you mess up and you make mistakes and then you learn how to recover from them. Um, I know with Ricky, the first couple of years I was out with Ricky, I was so conscious about playing the same fiddle parts that were on his record because I didn't want to disrespect him or his music. I wanted to play what the record sounded like. And there was a night where I just got finger tied. I couldn't land this solo, this particular solo, and I messed up and I had to recover my way out of it. And later that night on the bus, Ricky said the coolest thing to me. I just, I apologized about the song and making that mistake. And he said, man, he said, that wasn't a mistake to me. He said, I loved what you were going for. And he said, I love that. Keep it up. And it gave me the confidence to try new things. And I always laugh when I think about this. You know, Music comes from the heart, and that's where we want to play from. We want to play from the heart, but we also need to take our brains with it. And so there's been times where I've had to sort of stop and think about what I'm doing. I mean, because when you're younger and you're going for things, you sort of you forget to think, and you just go at it with your whole heart, and before you know it, you don't know where you're at. And that's happened to me countless times. And so um, I remember Ricky telling me one time that you got to get the chord changes in your head, and you got to get that melody down, and build from that. Don't just blow over a bunch of chord changes. Try your best to build a solo, and it should always be as you're going up a mountain, and when you get to the peak, you don't want to start going back down the other side of the mountain. Before the solo's over. So when I think of soloing, I always try to go, always have it build, and at the end, pass the solo off right as you get to the peak. And so I've always thought about that in improvising is you never want to just come out of the gate, um, uh, trying to play everything and so you want to try to build a solo if you can, if that makes any sense.
100%. And I think that's such a great way to think about it too. And I love what you said about playing with heart, but also bringing your brain along with it, because a lot of
Yeah.
times it's either or. And I think, as you said, kids tend to go with their whole heart, and that's how they play. Adults are kind of the opposite, right?
Yeah.
Where they play
Yeah.
up here, they're very in their heads and they kind of
Oh
leave the
yeah.
heart out of it. So I think that could be even some advice is just allow yourself to have fun, allow yourself to feel the
Hmm.
emotions, and allow that to propel you forward and not be too worried about those mistakes. But when you were talking about playing with Ricky, and first of all, he sounds like such a great and encouraging band leader. I'm sure it's just a
He's the
blast to be
best.
able to work with him.
Yes.
When you are creating your fiddle solos, do you typically listen to the songs ahead of time, work up a solo, and then come, to join everybody for the rehearsal with that prepared? Or is it something that you're coming up with on the spot in context when you're able to be around everyone and kind of experience being in that environment?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think we should always be prepared. I always try to come up with a shape of a solo, a good idea of what I'm going to play. However, there's been so many times where you're playing with a musician and they do something that's really cool and inspires you to want to do something different. And so, in Ricky's band and in the instrumentals that we played in his band, I always had a good shape of the solo that I wanted to play. But from the shape of that solo, it would vary from night to night, just depending on the audience, how much they're into it, because you get a lot of, you feed off the audience a lot. And if Cody or Ricky or at the time Justin Moses was playing banjo with us, and Justin would always play something really cool, and it's like it inspires you to want to go for something, and if you land it, it's so much more fun. And so um, but definitely being prepared is a good word for anybody, you know, going on stage and playing in front of people. I never wanted whatever song it was that we were going to play in the set list that night. I never want to play that for the first time on stage in front of people. I want to at least have a chance before the show to run through my solos or run through my ideas of what I think I'm going to play that night. Um, so I never rule out spontaneity and what may happen on stage, but I certainly want to have a game plan for sure.
Yes, and that's a great approach. And as you mentioned earlier, landing the chord changes, making sure that you're hitting those important points, having the general shape, but also allowing that freedom and flexibility for play or whatever might come up in the moment, depending on how the audience is responding and just your interaction with the other musicians on stage.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
Why is it so important for budding musicians, especially string players, to play with other musicians?
Oh goodness. Yeah, I mean it's a way of communication. It's the universal language. And I didn't grow up in the string world. I didn't grow up playing classical music. I grew up playing in jams and fiddle contests, and so I don't know anything outside of that. Um, However, I do have a lot of friends in the string world, and it's one of those things that I think about a good storyteller that would, if you ever listen to a lecture, or if you ever listen to somebody who's very passionate about what they do, it always inspires you. If you go to a class and your teacher is doing nothing but he's got his head in the book, and he's not, you know, if all he's doing is reading the words on the paper, it's not very inspiring. But if he closes the book and he teaches you straight from his heart because he's memorized it and he knows it, uh, it's very inspiring. And I think music's the same way. I think with string players, they get so glued to the notation and the paper that they forget to throw the paper away and play from the heart, because it starts in our mind. We've got to learn the part, but once we learn the part, let's memorize the part and let's throw the paper away and let's start playing from the heart. And so that's sort of I think goes with anything, not just music, but just anything you may be involved in. Um, we learn, then we perform, and I think with string players, uh, that might be their biggest challenge. Maybe is just getting away from the noted paper and trying to play with other musicians, and it's hard to play with other musicians when you have to set up a music stand and put a piece of music in front of you,
Right. You're
and
literally creating a physical barrier
yeah.
between you and the other musicians in the room. That's right.
Yeah, so I tell any string player that's wanting to get into fiddling or bluegrass music, or even improvising, like we talked about earlier, is just simply learn some fiddle tunes and memorize them. And it's music is so easy to memorize. But I will say, the older you get, it's a little bit more of a challenge than it is when you're a kid and you're a sponge and you can soak it all up. But if you can learn a fiddle tune and memorize it, and then go to a jam and play that fiddle tune with other players, it's a blast, and it helps build your confidence, and really it makes it worth it for you, for sure.
Definitely. And if you're learning the standards, even if you just have a few of them memorized, Angela and the Baker, Cripple Creek, Old Joe Clark, tunes like that, most likely other people in the jam are gonna, know those
Yeah.
tunes and they'll be able to play along with you. So it just makes it that much more fun and it's a great way to
Hmm.
just practice, right? And, feel more comfortable
Yeah.
being able to somewhat perform in a way because other people are
Hmm.
hearing you. So there's that added
Totally.
level of awareness. And then also just getting used to responding in real time to other musicians.
Yeah, and I'll say another tip about string players. If you don't have a lot of experience playing with other musicians, don't spend a lot of time practicing just by yourself. Make sure you put in a CD, or download some music, and practice along to a CD or some sort of music, and get the feel of playing with other band members, and that always helps, because you could be a great musician, but if you can't play in time, nobody's going to want to play with you. So you got to ingrain some timing, and I think when you spend a lot of time by yourself, it's hard to do that. So I would encourage anybody, picking the instrument up for the first time, to make sure you spend some time playing to music. Because fiddle is not necessarily a rhythm instrument. It can be, but it's not really. It's not its role, and so it's more melody driven. So make sure you practice with the metronome and practice the different CDs and albums.
Absolutely. Great advice. And before I forget, I want to go back to something you said earlier, which is when practicing improvising, taking little pieces from other tunes and
Hmm.
implementing them that are in the same key and implementing them into the tune you're playing. I think that's such a fun way and also sort of a simple way to get started improvising.
Oh, totally.
And it's fun to create those medleys. And
Hmm.
when you're playing one tune and then you suddenly start playing something else, a lot of the times other musicians will light up like, "Oh, I know that tune," and they'll be able
Yep.
to follow suit, and then you can decide if you want to jump back into the original tune or not, or move on to something different. But yeah, I
Yep.
really love that concept of mixing and matching different tunes. There's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just a simple four beat measure of music could change the way you approach a song. Stealing from another song and adding it to the one you're working on at the moment. So for sure.
Well, just a few more questions for you, and then we'll wrap up. Andy, what do you hope listeners, whether they're musicians or simply music lovers, carry with them after hearing Aced?
Oh goodness. Hopefully not discouragement. uh, I actually had a lady come to my concert a couple weeks ago. I saw her later, and she was trying to be honest. I think she was trying to pay me a compliment. I don't know, but um, she said, "Your show was exhausting."
What?
I'm like,
Wow.
"Wow, okay." And so nothing like true, honest feedback. And so
Right.
she said it was amazing, but it was exhausting.
Mm.
And so I got to thinking, man, maybe what's challenging to me might be a little overboard with the listener. So I hope and pray that that folks, when they listen to it, they walk away inspired and not exhausted. um, so I instrumental music, for me, is just it's like classical music. I love listening to Bach and Mozart and Beethoven, and some of the greats. That this piece of music should move you and take you places. And so I hope when somebody listens to my songs that it'll take them somewhere, and it'll inspire them and excite them. I love music that excites you, and that's joyful. And so I, I'm not big on dark music. I don't like dark music. Life is hard enough. I want music that'll help you. And so I'm hoping that the tunes on this record will put a song in your heart and will help you tap your foot and help you get through the day. If you're struggling, if you put on this music, hopefully it'll bring you some joy and and maybe inspire a few out there to pick up an instrument and try to play.
That's great. And I will say that's true for me as far as just getting that sense of positivity when listening to your music. It is very exciting and uplifting, and that's something that I really love about it. And the foot tapping,
Yeah.
as you said, my foot was going the whole time. So it's very fun and enjoyable to listen to, and we can really tell, how much you've put into it. So that definitely
Amen.
comes
Thank
across.
you.
Where do you see your music heading in the next few years?
Oh goodness. Well, I have a lot of ideas of what I want to do as far as projects goes. But I learned a long time ago that it's, you know, it, if you set, I mean, it's great to set goals, and I'm always up for that. But I don't want to plan things too far in the future to where I limit myself. So I just try to do the best I can, kind of day to day, mindset, and see what comes my way, and always try to be prepared for that. But as far as projects and recording music in the future, I would love to one day do a heroes type record where I bring in some of my favorite players and singers that I've had the privilege and honor to work with over the years. And you know, I, I released a gospel hymns CD a couple years ago. I'd love to do something like that again in the future, um, and more, you know, bluegrass records that feature instrumentals that you can pick on and show off on. And so um, just a lot's there as far as my desires and want to record. I'd obviously love to do more performances. I love playing shows and love playing in front of folks. I mean, sessions keep me pretty busy in Nashville, and I've got a studio here at my house, and so that's always great. It fills up the gaps when you're not on the road. But I love playing in front of folks, and I love performing. And so if I can do more of that, that'd be great.
You mentioned that you're getting ready to hop on a weekend run with Ricky Skaggs' band, and you do a lot of session work, and I know you've played with other artists over the years. How do you balance your own projects and finding time for your own tune writing and sessions and everything like that, and playing for these other artists and making sure that you're at the top of your game in that respect?
Lots and lots of prayer. That's how I
Okay.
balance it. Yeah. I think just like anything else, you really have to strike a balance with things, or it overtakes you. And honestly, I don't want to just do sessions. I don't want to just do road. I don't want to just do one thing. I love a combination of everything. It inspires me it keeps me fresh. And um, so yeah, I'm really looking forward to picking with Ricky tomorrow in Florida, and then next week I have sessions all week long to record. The only thing with recording is that it really does drain you, because you're under a microscope all day long. You've got headphones on your head, and you're in the details. And so at the end of the day, I feel like a dish rack. I mean, I'm just, I'm done. And so it's hard to get home and be inspired to want to pick up your instrument and write something. Uh, the times of inspiration for me come early in the morning and late at night. It's there'll be times where I'll be laying in bed, and I have to tell Rachel, I got to get up and get this song out of my mind, or I'm gonna go crazy. I'll have a melody go through my mind, and I've got to get up and get my instrument in my hand and try to work it out. So it's hard for me to find time during the middle of the day, and when I do have time, it's a blessing to sit and play and just work on some things that get overlooked from the day to day. So, but I'm thankful for the balance that I have right now of the road and sessions, and what little ministry, I've got some churches I play at from all year round. It's a great combination right now, and I don't want to change that if I can help it.
Last question, and then I promise I'll let you go. Where can listeners find you on social media?
Well, we do have a Facebook and Instagram, and we've got a website that folks can reach out to me on. I got to say, though, I barely have time to check my email, so I don't really keep up very well on social media like I should. But you can message me, and I promise you I'll do my best to respond. And my wife, Rachel, really helps me with all that. You can email me at andyleftwich.com, and and so I'm very, very accessible, I guess, when it comes to that. So Facebook and Instagram, all that stuff. I mean, it's over my head, but Rachel helps me with it. So
sometimes we need those helpers.
Yes,
I'm
definitely.
with you on the social media front, not my strength.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Andy,
Yeah.
it was so great chatting with you today. Thanks so much for sharing your music with us and your story.
Well, I'm honored to be part of the program, and thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Tune Project podcast. If you liked what you heard from Andy and would like to keep up with his latest projects, check out the show notes for links to his music, show dates, and more. Until next time.